Arsenal Football Club right now is living through one of the most complex and fascinating weeks in their recent history. The dust is still settling from Wembley. The international break has arrived at the worst possible time for some and the best possible time for others. Transfer business is already accelerating behind the scenes, and the debate around this squad, these players and this manager has never been louder. This is not a quiet moment for Arsenal. This is the eye of the storm. In the next several minutes, we are going to go through everything that is happening around this club right now, story by story, piece by piece. We are going to separate fact from rumour. We are going to look at what the numbers are telling us, and we are going to try to understand what it all means for Arsenal as they approach the most critical stretch of their season. So let us get straight into it. What is actually at stake for Arsenal right now is enormous. They are 9 points clear at the top of the Premier League table. They are in the quarter-finals of the Champions League and the FA Cup. They have just lost a cup final. Key players are injured, others are fatigued, and the summer transfer window is already moving, with decisions being made right now that will shape this club for years to come. If Arsenal lose focus at this moment, they could end a historic season with nothing. If they stay disciplined and execute, they could be crowned Premier League champions and push deep into Europe and the domestic cup. The margin between those two outcomes is razor thin, and that is exactly why every single story coming out of this club right now matters deeply. If you want this level of detail every single time something happens at Arsenal, hit that subscribe button right now. Melissa Arsenal Analysis is built for supporters who want the full picture, not just the headlines. Let us go through everything. The Julian Alvarez transfer situation. Let us start with the transfer news, because this is significant. Reports from Spain are now claiming that a World Cup winning striker is ready to say yes to a blockbuster summer move to Arsenal. The player being identified is Julian Alvarez, the Atletico Madrid forward. Andrea Berta, Arsenal's sporting director, has reportedly received a firm yes from the Argentine international to move to North London this summer. Now, let me be completely clear here. This is a rumour. This is not a confirmed transfer. This has not been officially announced by any club involved. But the detail around this story is worth taking seriously. The claim is that Alvarez already has a new team in the form of Arsenal, and that terms are already close to being finalised. The reasoning behind the move is also interesting. Arsenal reportedly offered him both sporting and contractual guarantees that Barcelona, who were also in the picture, could not match due to their ongoing financial constraints. The report also states that Arsenal accelerated their approach and convinced the player, and that their sporting project, already established among Europe's elite, was a key factor in convincing Alvarez that North London was the right destination. Now, my reading of this situation is straightforward. Andrea Berta has wasted absolutely no time. The man was brought in to reshape this squad, and he is already operating at the highest level of the market before the season has even ended. If the Alvarez story has any substance to it, this would represent a transformational signing for Arsenal. A World Cup winner, a proven goalscorer at the highest level, arriving to give Mikel Arteta genuine options in attack. That is not a small thing. That is a statement of intent. But again, I want to be honest with you. Until there is an official confirmation, this is a rumour. Track it closely, but do not treat it as done business yet. Seni Mulu, offer submitted. Moving to another transfer development, and this one also involves Andrea Berta making moves already. Arsenal have reportedly submitted an offer to the representatives of Seni Mulu, a 19-year-old midfielder currently at Paris Saint-Germain. According to French media outlet Media Foot, Arsenal are described as the most eager suitors for the player and have already made their move to his representatives. Let us look at who Mayulu actually is. He has made 76 appearances for Paris Saint-Germain's first team. He has scored 12 goals and contributed 9 assists across that time. This season specifically, under manager Luis Enrique, he has made 19 League One appearances and 9 Champions League appearances. In those matches, he has scored 5 goals and provided 4 assists. His profile is described as technically sharp, attack-minded, and a player with a high ceiling and long-term investment potential. Tottenham Hotspur previously showed interest in Mayulu, but Arsenal are now described as having moved ahead of them in the race. My analysis here is this. Berta is clearly building for the future while also addressing the present. Mayulu, at 19 years old, is not coming to be a starter from day one, but he represents exactly the kind of young, talented, European-proven player that fits the profile of what Arsenal are building. The fact that Tottenham were already tracking him and Arsenal have now submitted an offer suggests Berta is moving fast and with clear purpose. This one is worth watching very closely over the coming weeks. Andrea Berta's sales mandate. Now, here is a story that tells you everything about where Arsenal are as a club in terms of their internal structure and expectations. The situation is that Arsenal have set a very clear standard for Andrea Berta going into this summer. While the club acknowledged that Berta did excellent work buying players in last summer's transfer window, the emphasis has now shifted dramatically. The club has made it known that his primary challenge and the main criterion by which he will be judged this summer is selling well. This is not just an interesting detail, this is a fundamental piece of information that shapes everything else happening around Arsenal's transfer business. The reality for the club is that they need to generate funds intelligently. They cannot simply keep spending without balancing the books, and Berta has been given a clear message. Recruitment last summer was praised, but now comes the harder part of the job, getting maximum value for players who are no longer in the first team plans. This leads us directly into two other stories. Ben White and Gabriel Jesus, set to leave Arsenal, have reportedly decided to part ways with both Ben White and Gabriel Jesus this summer. This is described as a summer fire sale, with a second source confirming that both players have been approved for departure. Now, let us be precise, this is still reported information, not an official announcement, but two sources confirming the same thing does carry more weight than a single claim. White and Jesus have both been key figures under Arteta in past seasons. Their potential departures would not come as a complete surprise to anyone who has been paying attention. Jesus has struggled with injuries and consistency. White has had his own complicated situation, which we will get to in a moment when we discuss his England recall. The plan, according to the information available, is for Arsenal to reinvest the funds from White's sale. The club is showing significant interest in a player called Wesley from AS Roma following his breakthrough season. White himself has been linked with both Everton and Chelsea, with a move to Stamford Bridge also described as a possibility. My reading of this is clear. Arsenal are doing what smart clubs do. They are cycling out players whose best years at the club may be behind them and using those funds to bring in new energy. Berta's mandate to sell well is directly connected to this. The club needs to get good money for White and Jesus in order to fuel the next phase of recruitment. Ben White and England, the Henry Winter debate. And this brings us to what I think is one of the more fascinating storylines of the week. Ben White has been recalled to the England squad, and that recall has triggered a very public debate. Journalist Henry Winter made his position very clear. He argued that White's return to the England fold after a self-imposed absence of 3.5 years borders on the insulting to Trent Alexander-Arnold, who continues to be overlooked by Thomas Tuchel at right-back. Winter pointed out that with Reece James injured, Kyle Walker and Kieran Trippier both retired from international football, and Jarell Quansah withdrawn from the squad, Alexander-Arnold is still not being called up despite being Real Madrid's right-back in the Champions League and a demonstrated penalty taker in tournament shootouts. Winter demanded that White explain publicly why he turned his back on England for 3.5 years after leaving England's World Cup camp in Qatar in 2022 early. Now, here is my analysis of this situation, and I want to be very direct about it. Henry Winter's frustration about Alexander-Arnold is legitimate as a football debate. The argument about why a player of that calibre is being overlooked is a fair question. But the demand that Ben White publicly explain his personal decision to step away from international football is where I think the argument falls apart completely. The situation is that White left England's World Cup camp in 2022 and never publicly explained his reasons. Since then, he never attempted to shape the narrative or offer partial explanations through briefings. That consistency across 3.5 years is not avoidance. That is a deliberate choice by a man who considers this a private matter. White is now back under a different manager. Thomas Tuchel made a football decision based on form and availability. That decision does not carry with it any obligation for White to stand before the media and justify something that was always his personal business to manage. The evidence suggests that demanding public explanations from footballers about deeply personal decisions, particularly ones that clearly involve mental or emotional well-being, given the reported nature of his difficulties in the England setup, is not the role of football journalism. White owes the public his performances on the pitch, nothing more. Eberechi Eze injury and the fixtures he will miss now to one of the most damaging pieces of news for Arsenal in recent days. Eberechi Eze is set to be sidelined for between 4 and 6 weeks with a calf injury. The 27-year-old sustained the injury against Bayer Leverkusen and was absent from the Carabao Cup final squad as a result. Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta confirmed that Eze was due to undergo a further scan on the injury, which also forced his withdrawal from England's squad for their upcoming friendlies against Uruguay and Japan. Now, let us be very clear about what this injury actually means in practical terms, because the fixtures Eze will miss are brutal in their timing. April 4th, Southampton versus Arsenal in the FA Cup. April 7th, Sporting CP versus Arsenal in the Champions League. April 11th, Arsenal versus Bournemouth in the Premier League. April 15th, Arsenal versus Sporting CP in the Champions League return leg. April 19th, Manchester City versus Arsenal in the Premier League. And April 25th, Arsenal versus Newcastle in the Premier League. That is 6 matches. That includes both legs of a Champions League quarter-final. It includes a FA Cup tie, and it includes one of the most significant remaining Premier League fixtures of the season in the Manchester City game. The reality for the club is that losing Eze for this specific run of games is a genuinely serious blow. His creativity, his ability to carry the ball and unlock defences is something Arsenal do not have in abundance. This is not a rotation player going down. This is a player who is becoming increasingly important to how Arteta's side play. Martin Zubimendi, fatigue and the form dip. This is perhaps the most analytically interesting story surrounding Arsenal right now, and it is one that requires careful examination. Martin Zubimendi has gone from being one of the signings of the summer to a player who is clearly struggling for form, and the reasons behind that dip deserve to be understood properly. The numbers tell a very specific story. No Arsenal outfield player has clocked more minutes than Zubimendi this season. He has accumulated 3,574 minutes across 44 games for Arsenal alone. He is on course to exceed 4,000 minutes across club and country for the first time in his entire career. When you factor in his Spain international duties, if he plays both matches during this break against Serbia and Egypt, he will have made 51 appearances this season for club and country combined. Now, look at what those numbers have done to his output. From August to December, his passing accuracy was 89%. From January to now, that figure has dropped to 85.7%. He is having fewer touches. He is creating fewer chances. His last goal for Arsenal was 12 games ago. His last assist came in December. Ian Wright, speaking after the Carabao Cup final defeat to Manchester City, was direct in his criticism. Wright said Arsenal did not have any midfielders in that game in the sense of someone commanding the ball, and pointed specifically to Zubimendi's inability to retain possession and dictate play. He said it was a very disappointing performance and called for the team to front up and go again. Rio Ferdinand made a similar point, comparing Zubimendi unfavourably to the very best midfielders in the world in terms of his ability to impose himself on a big game and demand the ball in difficult moments. But here is the analytical context that is essential to this conversation. Mikel Arteta has relied on Zubimendi so heavily that fellow summer signing Christian Norgard has not started a single Premier League game. Zubimendi is being asked to carry an enormous load. And the evidence clearly suggests that load is now taking a physical and mental toll. The international break is the worst possible timing for Arsenal in one sense, because what Zubimendi arguably needs most is rest. Instead, he is with Spain preparing to play 2 friendlies. My assessment is this: the dip in Zubimendi's form is real and is clearly linked to workload. The criticism from Wright and Ferdinand is fair in isolation, but the responsibility for this situation sits firmly with the coaching setup. When you have a player covering more ground than almost anyone else in the league, operating across more minutes than any other outfield player at the club, and you have not found a way to rotate him, the consequences are entirely predictable. Arteta must find a way to manage Zubimendi more carefully through the final stretch of this season. Paul Merson, Micah Richards and the trophy debates. After Arsenal's 2-0 defeat to Manchester City in the Carabao Cup final, Paul Merson made a bold prediction. He said he does not see Arsenal winning anything else this season except the Premier League. His reasoning was twofold. First, he believes Manchester City remain too strong for Arsenal in the FA Cup. Second, he argued that Arsenal do not have the pace to trouble Barcelona's high line in what he projects to be a Champions League semi-final between the two sides. He specifically said Arsenal's forward players are not electric in the way that Anthony Elanga or Anthony Gordon troubled Barcelona in the last 16. Micah Richards strongly disagreed with this assessment and named Gabriel Martinelli and Victor Gyokeres as players who have exactly the attributes to hurt Barcelona. Richards said specifically that Martinelli would absolutely love playing against a high defensive line, and that Gyokeres, while not the quickest, is a powerful runner who scores goals in exactly those situations. Gary Lineker also raised similar doubts about Arsenal's ability to trouble Barcelona. Now, the probability data gives us an additional layer here. According to Polymarket odds, Arsenal's chances of winning each remaining competition currently stand at 90% for the Premier League, 38% for the FA Cup, and 29% for the Champions League. My reading of the Merson and Richards debate is that Merson is making a reasonable point based on what he saw in the second half of the Carabao Cup final. But extrapolating one 90-minute performance against a rejuvenated Manchester City side into a prediction about Champions League semi-finals is a significant leap. The Gyokeres and Martinelli counter-argument holds genuine weight. And as the data shows, Arsenal remain heavy favourites for the Premier League, regardless of what happens in the other competitions. Victor Gyokeres and the conversion rate numbers. Speaking of Gyokeres, the statistics around his finishing this season are genuinely remarkable and deserve their own moment of analysis. The comparison data for the 2025 to 2026 season across all competitions makes for extraordinary reading. Erling Haaland of Manchester City has made 39 appearances, scored 29 goals from 74 shots on goal, giving him a conversion rate of approximately 39%. Hugo Ekitike of Liverpool has made 41 appearances, scored 16 goals from 34 shots, giving him a conversion rate of approximately 47%. Victor Gyokeres of Arsenal has made 41 appearances, scored 16 goals from just 26 shots on goal, giving him a conversion rate of approximately 61%. 61%, that is the highest conversion rate among the Premier League's top strikers. It means that when Gyokeres gets a genuine chance, he scores more often than almost anyone else in the league. He is the most efficient finisher in this data set by a significant margin. This matters enormously when discussing Arsenal's ability to score goals in high-stakes knockout games. Gyokeres does not need volume to hurt you, he needs moments. And against a Barcelona high line, as Micah Richards suggested, those moments will come. Pep Guardiola on Arteta and the Wembley gesture, one of the most genuinely moving stories to emerge from the Carabao Cup final aftermath, did not involve goals or tactics. It involved character. After Arsenal lost 2-0 to Manchester City, the Arsenal players and coaching staff had to collect their runners-up medals first, as is the tradition. They then came back down as Manchester City went up to collect the trophy. At that point, Mikel Arteta, his coaching staff and the Arsenal players could have gone straight back inside the stadium. Instead, they stayed on the pitch and waited until City had lifted the cup and come back down from the balcony. Pep Guardiola noticed this and he spoke about it publicly on CBS Sports. He said Arsenal are the strongest team in Europe right now. He pointed to their position in both the Champions League and Premier League as evidence of that. He said winning the Carabao Cup for the 5th time in 10 years made him happy, but especially beating Arsenal specifically because of the level they are operating at. And then he said directly, and I want to give you the essence of what he expressed, that he had huge respect for Arteta and his people for staying and waiting until City had come down. He called it an incredible gesture. My analysis of this is simple. How you behave in defeat tells you everything about a football club's culture. The fact that Arteta kept his entire squad and staff on that pitch to show respect to the winners in the immediate aftermath of a painful loss reflects the values that have been built into this club. Guardiola, one of the most respected managers in football history, publicly acknowledged it. That is not nothing. That is a statement about who Arsenal are. Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville on the Premier League run in 2 of football's most prominent analysts have now made their positions on Arsenal's title chances very clear and interesting. They are both pointing in the same direction. Jamie Carragher stated plainly that Arsenal have everything it takes to win the league. He said the remaining fixtures are very favourable for them on the way to the title. He identified Manchester City as the only real challenge in those remaining games, with the rest being there to be won. And he concluded by saying he is confident Arsenal will go on to be crowned champions. Gary Neville took a slightly different but complementary angle. He urged Arteta to use this international break to focus exclusively on the final 7 Premier League matches. He said at this stage Arteta should not even be thinking about any other competition apart from the Premier League. He described the final 7 games as where it is won or lost and said Arteta needs to plan for them more carefully than he planned for the previous 31. The evidence strongly supports this reading of the situation. 9 points clear at the top of the table, 7 games remaining, a favourable run of fixtures aside from the Manchester City match. Arsenal are in an extraordinarily strong position. Martin Odegaard's return and the captain's importance. Among the more positive developments for Arsenal during this period is the news around captain Martin Odegaard. The Norwegian has been absent from international duty since Norway beat Moldova 11-1, missing matches against Israel, Estonia and Italy. Norway manager Ståle Solbakken described Odegaard as very frustrated and grumpy about his injury situation. He acknowledged there is no reason for Odegaard to travel for Norway's upcoming friendlies, but expressed genuine optimism that the captain could be back available for Arsenal in around 2.5 to 3 weeks. The more significant update is that Arsenal have reportedly managed Odegaard's recovery carefully with the specific goal of having him fully fit for the run-in. The expectation is that he will return after the international break ready to play. If that happens, the timing could not be better. Arsenal's most creative and influential midfielder returning just as the most critical phase of the season begins is exactly the kind of development that can change the momentum of a title run in Piero Hincapié on Gabriel Heinz's defensive coaching impact. There is a story here that speaks to something happening beneath the surface at Arsenal that does not always get the attention it deserves. Piero Hincapié has spoken publicly about the impact of Gabriel Heinze, the former Manchester United defender who has joined Mikel Arteta's coaching staff. Hincapié described Heinze as someone who helps a lot with the defensive side, gives advice to everyone and serves as a great reference point during training sessions. The context here is important. Arsenal have developed into one of the most reliable defensive units in European football over recent seasons. Heinze's influence is described as complementing the work already being done by Nicolas Jova, the set-piece coach who has received widespread praise for transforming Arsenal's effectiveness from dead ball situations. This is how elite clubs are built, not just through spending in the transfer market, but through incremental improvements in coaching quality at every level of the setup. Heinze represents another layer of expertise being added to an already high-functioning operation. Theo Walcott on Max Dowman and the World Cup question. Theo Walcott, who was famously included in England's World Cup squad at just 17 years old in 2006, has offered a very direct piece of advice regarding Arsenal youngster Max Dowman. If Thomas Tuchel selects Dowman for this summer's World Cup tournament in North America, Walcott's message is clear. He hopes the youngster does not go. Walcott drew explicitly on his own experience, saying that if he could go back in time, he would change his own decision to be part of that 2006 squad. He acknowledged the almost impossible nature of telling a 17-year-old to say no to a World Cup, but maintained that Dowman needs to grow at his own pace, especially on the emotional side. Walcott also noted that England already have wide players who arguably deserve to be ahead of Dowman at this stage, naming Bukayo Saka, Noni Madueke, Jared Bowen, Anthony Gordon, and Harvey Barnes as players operating at a higher level of readiness for a major tournament. My analysis is that Walcott's perspective here is genuine and comes from real lived experience. The pressures of a World Cup on a teenager who is still establishing himself in club football can be enormously damaging. This is not a story about whether Dowman is talented enough. It is a story about whether the timing is right for his development. And Walcott, speaking from personal experience, believes it is not. Alex Jimenez as a transfer target, one additional transfer name to be aware of. Andrea Berta has reportedly identified Alex Jimenez as one of multiple targets ahead of this summer window. The report describes Jimenez as a player who would jump at the chance to sign for Arsenal should their interest become more concrete. No official offer has been submitted at this point, and this remains at the stage of scouting and identification rather than active negotiation. Closing analysis, let us step back and look at everything we have covered today, because when you put it all together, it tells a very coherent story about where Arsenal Football Club are right now. On the pitch, they are 9 points clear in the Premier League with 7 games to play. Their captain is close to returning from injury. Their most clinical striker is converting at a rate no other top striker in the league can match. And the evidence of how they handled defeat at Wembley suggests a club with the right values and mental foundation to see this title race through. Off the pitch, Andrea Berta is already in motion. The Alvarez rumour, if it has substance, would be transformational. The Mayulu offer shows long-term planning, and the mandate to sell well this summer signals that Arsenal understand exactly what kind of financial discipline is required to sustain this level of ambition. The challenges are real. Eze is out for up to 6 weeks at the worst possible time. Zubimendi is visibly fatigued and needs careful management through the final stretch. And the question of whether Arsenal can genuinely compete in the Champions League and FA Cup simultaneously while securing the Premier League title remains open. But the foundation is solid. The belief internally and externally, based on what Carragher, Neville and Guardiola have all said in different ways, is that this is a club ready to take what is there to be taken. The finishing line is close. The question now is whether Arsenal walk to it or sprint. That is the full picture. That is Tom Arsenal Talks. Subscribe if you want this level of analysis every single time something moves at this football club, and I will see you in the next one.